Welcome to Football Never Sleeps. Viral adjacent and caffeine friendly, this is your weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and a fan base that's finding out that recruiting never sleeps. I'm Eric Hansen in South Bend and wondering if Marcus Freeman can deploy Hannah Hidalgo as a blitzer to knock the ball out of the quarterback's hands. He's Tyler James in LaPorte and wondering if somebody put whiskey in my coffee. Together, we are the word salad avoiding content creators at blueandgold.com, part of a mega team covering the Irish for the On3 network. On tonight's show, what does leaving no doubt mean for CJ Carr? We're going to look at how that phrase plays into his evolution, as well as the backup quarterback race behind him. Running backs, wide receivers, linebackers, we talked to them all last week. We'll have the news on those position groups. Freshman surprises, recruiting, and of course your questions to start filling up that queue. This is Football Never Sleeps. And Tyler's going to turn into a mime today. I'll tell you what he's saying.
Man. What a great start by me. Oh, man. I just said before
I think somebody sabotaged you when an older guy that's tech savvy sabotages a younger guy that doesn't know what he's doing. Okay, go ahead with your spiel.
Yeah, where's Rajon at? I don't see him in the chat. Maybe he's up to some nefarious things. I appreciate you guys joining us on a Monday night. That's what I was saying, that when you couldn't hear me, unless you're a very good lip reader. Shout out to Jeff, Mike, TD, Irish fan, a couple of Irish fans, Irish fan 1010, Irish fan 44 in the chat already. We appreciate you guys chiming in, whether you're watching us live or on replay. Please make sure that you're subscribed to us here on the channel and hit the like button on this video. If you haven't already taken advantage of the spring sale for Blue and Gold, you need to do so right now. New subscribers get 50% off the first year of an annual subscription. So instead of spending nearly $120 for a year, it's $59.99 for your first year. Take advantage of that deal before it expires. Later in April, use the link in our video description or head to blueandgold.com and hit the join button. As Eric mentioned at the top with his mic unmuted, we were going to talk a little bit about quarterback development to start the show. Notre Dame has completed its 5th spring practice. That was Saturday, which means the Irish are a third of the way through the spring practices. We will talk to Marcus Freeman later this week, with the Irish having a light week ahead of Easter break this coming weekend. But one of the biggest storylines of spring practice and going into spring practice was the backup quarterback competition. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk about CJ Carr and his development in the spring. What have you heard? What did you like about the conversation you had with CJ Carr last week?
Yeah, CJ Carr and Gino Guidugli, both were pretty insightful. I asked Gino right off the bat, what did leaving no doubt look like for CJ Carr? And this happened in December. He started looking at all Notre Dame's film and then all the NFL teams' films. And the point of doing that was to try to find what he could do better from the Notre Dame film. From the NFL was looking for offenses that ran things similarly to what Notre Dame does and how he could express those plays better by watching somebody like Matthew Stafford. That's kind of the guy that he picked out from the Rams and felt like that was really helpful for him. Also watching defenses, how they defended those certain plays and those offenses, and he got a lot of insight out of that. I think the second part of his evolution was leadership. One thing that he did a great job of, going from a guy that had 4 college snaps before the Miami game to being one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the country, was building equity in the locker room, having relationships with everybody on both sides of the ball, so that, when he called somebody out and tried to raise the level of their game, it wasn't like, well, why is he picking on me, or who does he think he is? It's CJ cares about me and he just wants us to be better as a group. Thought that was interesting. Of course, working on the chemistry with wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. I think all quarterbacks do that. I think CJ does it at a maniacal level sometimes. One element, too, was being a smarter runner. I think early in the season last year, there was a thought of maybe having CJ work with a speed coach and become a better runner. I think over the course of the season, the coaching staff felt really good about what he did in the running game in terms of scrambling. They didn't want to make him, Riley Leonard, but they wanted to make him a guy that could get 6 yards when they needed 5 on a third down and nothing was open. He's accomplished that very well so far. And then I think where he's really, really advanced is being next level at the line of scrimmage in terms of checking out of bad plays into good plays, sometimes great plays. Gino Guidugli said he's unique in college football in how he sees the big picture. And I think we'll see that show up on the field.
Yeah, I've asked a few of Notre Dame's receivers about CJ Carr, just like and different perspectives, like Jordan Faison, who was his top target last season, sort of picking up right where they left off, and that Jordan knows that CJ knows what's going to be best for the offense and how he's going to be able to take advantage of that. So if Jordan Faison's running an option route, CJ already knows the decision that Jordan Faison's going to make based on the look that the defense has given them. And that's going to make things a lot easier for Jordan Faison in terms of feeling confident about what he's doing. And then you talk to younger guys, even like Jerome Bettis Jr., and they're trying to maybe get more up to speed with CJ Carr because they haven't had as many reps with him, but they have complete faith that if they do what they're supposed to, the ball's going to be where it needs to be, because that's how proficient CJ Carr is at what he does. And so it's certainly impacting the offense from the top down, I would say, in terms of what CJ Carr can do and where he can take this offense. And it's good to hear that chemistry is continuing to evolve with not only guys that are returning, but guys that are getting to know CJ Carr a little bit better. And obviously we'll get a better sense for what that looks like with Mylan Graham as things move forward, and then Quincy Porter when he gets healthy, because there are a lot of weapons in that wide receiver room that can be tapped into for CJ Carr this coming season. As for those backup quarterbacks we talked about, Eric, what are you hearing? What was said about how Hebert and Grubbs have looked?
So, in just talking to Gino, let's start with talking to Gino Guidugli, the quarterback's coach, first. His assessment was, I'm not asking them to do CJ Carr stuff this spring, but what I do want them to do is have a good handle on the offense and be able to do basic things at the line of scrimmage, like sliding protections, not necessarily being able to check out of plays, but something very basic in terms of sliding protections, understanding coverages, just keeping things at very basic fundamental things, and then looking at them and grading them on those kinds of things. Now, what did I see with my eyes in the 2 practices that we were able to have a viewing window at? For me, Blake Hebert looks like I thought he would from an athleticism standpoint. When he's on the run, he's kind of exciting. He is able to pass on the run. He's able to elude pass rushes very well. He's a guy that looks like he'd be really good with the zone read game. We're not seeing a lot of that because they weren't doing contact in the practices that we were at.
Right.
We will eventually see that, although he's in a red jersey. I don't know how much contact we'll see, but we'll be able to see more of that. Grubbs surprised me with my eyes, with his arm strength. Again, he has the high school body to still, we'll see him a year from now and we'll forget that he was in high school at this or should have been in high school at this time. But I liked the way that he bounced back from mistakes. I liked the fact that just the way that he handled himself. Now, talking to some people behind the scenes, I have a intel piece coming out tomorrow morning, and I'll tip my hand a little bit on it. Grubbs has been a big surprise. His processing speed with the way that he makes decisions at the line of scrimmage, makes decisions as the play's going on, have been really impressive through some stacked practices. And again, we're only through a third of the practices of spring, but this is a really good start. They thought he would be good at that. He's ahead of the curve in terms of where they thought he'd be. And so that's kind of exciting when you think about the race for the number 2 quarterback. Teddy Gerard has been a witness at one of the practices that we've been at. He is taking online classes down in Georgia to finish his junior year so he can graduate a year early. He'll be a factor in this, but I think the headline here is Grubb's early start. How about you? What did you see, and what have you observed, and how do you break it down?
Yeah, I think to me, Grubbs did look more comfortable in terms of what he was doing. I think maybe some of the settings that where you've been able to see allow for that a little bit more. I think when you're talking about, I mean, the second practice viewing out, which just is the first 4 periods, when you see guys just throwing passes to receivers, that's just more of a natural setting, I think, for Noah Grubbs, the 7-on-7 setting. I would say similarly, whereas like you mentioned with Blake Hebert, the athleticism that he has, we haven't really had a chance to see that yet, and that those are things that maybe he could use to his advantage. But I think when you're trying to test your quarterbacks, figure out what you have, I think you want them to be sort of on an equal playing field, and then as you move forward, figuring out, okay, what is Noah Grubbs' strengths? How can we accentuate that? What are Blake Hebert's strengths? How can we accentuate that? And so I'm curious to see how, as spring moves forward, they set those guys up in situations that may best fit them. But I think there has to be some, because it is truly a backup quarterback competition, there has to be some vision of what they want the offense to look like. Are they willing to have an offense that looks significantly different with the backup quarterback in than it does with CJ Carr in it? I think the expectations for what they're going to learn and process, like you mentioned, even though Noah Grubbs is showing an aptitude for that early on, that they're not going to be able to do it at the same level as CJ Carr. So if they're asked to do that, it's going to look a little bit different than what Carr is doing. But yeah, I think so far from what I've seen, and then from what you've heard and others have heard, it seems like Noah Grubbs is off to maybe a better start to spring practice than Blake Hebert. Maybe not terribly surprising given some of the information that was heard throughout the offseason. And I'm curious what it looks like moving forward, because like you mentioned, it's just a third of the way through, and they've just put pads on recently. That doesn't change things as much for the quarterbacks because they're not getting hit, but I think it gives you a better sense of what this looks like in actual game action, compared to some of the shorts and shoulder pad stuff that happens a lot early in the spring.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, as we look to later in the spring, what's this going to look like? And I think even though they won't be able to be hit, I think the pass rush will be more, it'll be less manufactured. When we see the scrimmage a week before the blue gold game, that's usually the most telling practice that we see of all the spring, because they're doing a lot more real football in that than they do in the blue gold game. And again, the pass rush is coming at natural angles, natural speeds. The receivers are being covered and bumped the way that they normally would be in a game. And so I think we're going to see a lot more. The one thing I want to say about Blake Hebert, and I know that there are Blake Hebert fans out there. I mean, there are guys that surprise all the time. And Blake Hebert could be one of those. Just because a guy is behind early doesn't mean they can't recover from that. And then there's some guys that just kind of get in a rut, and this is who they are, and they don't change. So I wouldn't write anybody off at any position. That's one of the fun things about covering spring football and fall camp, is there are people that are going to surprise you and say, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. Elijah Hughes and Cole Mullins are two guys that were backup defensive linemen, but I would not have bet on either of them playing, meaning, high leverage downs last year, and they both did.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, I think freshmen a lot of times hit a freshman wall. I think it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think it is real in some sense. Does Grubbs hit that at some point this spring? Typically, I think that is something you think about more it happening in a season, but I think that could happen in a spring that is drawn out. And like we mentioned, there's not a lot of action for Notre Dame this week, so it's almost like a little bit of a break, and then it'll ramp up again next week as they build towards the blue gold game. And is there sort of the opposite for Blake Hebert? Does something start to click for him? What does he get put in more situations that he can operate more comfortably from? What does the learning curve look like for both of those guys, even though they started in different places? How does that continue to evolve as we move forward this spring? All right, let's talk a little bit about running backs. We don't have many questions in here. I think I've seen a couple. We'll get to those after we talk about some running backs. Our first question is recruiting, so maybe we should add some recruiting talk earlier in the podcast or the show than normal, because I tend to leave that towards the end. But obviously there's news even today with Notre Dame picking up its second running back commitment in the class. But let's talk about the running backs on Notre Dame's roster first. What did we learn from running backs coach Jawan Sider when he met with reporters on Friday?
Yeah, Jawan Sider is one of those guys I could just spend an afternoon with talking to him about football. And I think he would do it. They rushed him out of there. They gave us the question count and so forth. But what I learned was, number one, how they were managing with the limited numbers. You have two scholarship running backs that are fully healthy. A third in Aeneas Williams, who thinks he's fully healthy, has a big brace on his right elbow, but he's doing a lot of the things. He won't be able to, now that they're in pads, he won't be able to do the team periods or do much in the team periods anyways, but he has kind of stepped over the boundary of what I think was expected of him. And then you have some walk-ons filling in, and you have Xavier Southall, who is on loan from the wide receiver room for the spring. And then you have two guys that came off the rugby team. They went to a February tryout with other players at other positions. I communicated with a rugby coach this weekend, Justin Hickey, and Curtis Smith is a guy that was new to rugby. He played football, was a 1,000-yard rusher as a senior in high school, was a state finalist in wrestling at the 190-pound class. And then you had Matt Williams, who's a junior, who's been in the Notre Dame rugby program for a while, was a rugby kid growing up in Naperville, Illinois, and also played football. And Jawan Sider was pretty jazzed. He goes, "Hey, yeah, rugby's just like sandlot football." And he said these guys are really helping him, because otherwise you'd have to overly tax the healthy players, expose them to more injuries, overwork them for what you want to get from a typical day. So the walk-ons are really helpful. I think when you look at the rest of the room, Aeneas Williams is absolutely killing it for a guy that's limited. And then Nolan James Jr. and Jonas Walton have been very impressive. And then you'll get Javian Osborne and Kedron Young back at the beginning of summer. And it's going to be a heck of a competition. I did ask Jawan, I said, can you determine yet how deep that rotation is going to be? And he said, not yet. I think he's open to what the number looks like, but he also was a little bit critical in a backward way of Dylan McCullough backs the year before in 2024. He just felt like Jeremiah Love wasn't on the field enough. And he had a point. I mean, Jeremiah Love averaged 10 carries a game in 2024. And he said if we had a deep rotation, Jeremiah Love isn't a Heisman finalist, and Jadarian Price isn't in the conversation for a first-round draft pick. So that was really interesting to hear his thoughts about that. What did you pull out of the running backs conversation, Tyler?
Yeah, I saw Jawan Sider used man crush, one of your favorite phrases when he was talking about Nolan James Jr., just about the way that he owns what he's supposed to be doing, and handles the responsibilities given to him. Like he says he's sort of advanced for his age in that. and spoke highly about Jonas Walton too, in that he's very intentional, very smart, a player that I think he said he could be a scientist. That's how smart he thinks Jonas Walton is. So very effusive praise.
There are people in this country that don't think scientists are smart, but we won't go there.
So yeah, you can see that Sider is excited about what he has in the room. Yes, you don't have Jeremiah Love and Jarian Price anymore. He's not asking these running backs to be them. He wants them to be the best versions of themselves. They can do things in their own ways to impact Notre Dame's offense this coming season. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the rotation, how deep it goes. What does it look like? Is Aeneas Williams as clear of a number one as we think he may be in that backfield? We'll see it. There's a lot of time left for that to develop. I think just in terms of Aeneas, it's interesting to me. And going back to like last fall when we got a chance to talk to him, he was pretty open about being frustrated and how it was a bit of a difficult season for him, sort of taking a step back in productivity and playing time between his freshman and sophomore years. But he believes that this is the right place for him, and that he knows that believes this is what's best for him. And I sort of appreciate that. What do you think of how he's handled this transition from a frustrating 2025 to seeing things through here at Notre Dame in 2026?
He impressed me beyond his words. He impressed me with his actions on the field, the way that he shows leadership, that he takes charge. He was coaching up the walk-ons between reps and talking to other people on the offense, communicating, just showing that he felt like he was an alpha, and then, kind of performing that way in the pass pattern, the wheel routes and stuff, and running the ball and doing a lot more things than I thought he would. He's been involved in special teams. We've seen him catch punts and kickoffs. In those big auditions, there's still like 6 people in each of those.
Yeah.
And he's a candidate in each of them. But just the way he carries himself, and even the way that he talks to the media, he just feels like a guy that got his second wind, and he's going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think in the era of the transfer portal, he is the kind of player that you would not be surprised to leave, right? Someone that has some success and maybe it goes away for a little bit, but rather than running for the exit, he sort of knows that now it's his turn, and he will be given that a fair opportunity to prove himself. And there can be a bright side to having less wear and tear on your body as a sophomore. And he's obviously dealing with an elbow injury on its own that he's got to take care of and make sure that gets completely healed up. So it's not something that continues to bug him. But as you mentioned, it doesn't look like it's bugging him when he's wearing that brace in practice. Even though he's not being cleared for full contact, he seems to be pretty confident in what he's able to do and how that will where he'll be trending going into next season. Speaking of going into the season, Kedron Young is someone who's not healthy right now, but given the latest information, what do you think are proper expectations for him when he returns?
Yeah, I had a chance to sit down with Kedron. I've always liked him. I like the way that he approaches life, and he's the most wild card in that hand of 5 running backs. He could be anywhere from 1 to 5. I think Jawan said anywhere from 1 to 3. I think it's realistic to be anywhere in that bunch, because I think those freshmen are not default 4 and 5 running backs. I'd be surprised if they're 4 and 5, but I thought, who would be? Who is?
Right. Someone has to.
Yeah. But Kedron, I thought what was interesting about him was he felt like his rehab was going great. He said he was going to be cleared for everything by the beginning of the summer when he comes back for summer workouts. And we talked about the mental hurdles that sometimes come with an ACL, and this is his first significant injury. I think he said the most he's ever been injured was maybe a sprained ankle in high school. in back in Texas. But he's just got a unique body type. He's got a high-end speed for a guy that's big. I mean, he's got Audric Estime kind of vibes about him. But he talked about how his mom taught him to have faith growing up, and he talked about how his mom is Superwoman and how much she influences life. And so he is not worried about, his knee giving way and so forth, that some people kind of deal with those issues. He's just, is he going to be the short yardage back? Is he going to be the starter? Is he going to be somewhere in between? Is he going to be sitting on the bench thinking about the portal? It's going to be really, really interesting. I am pushing my chips on him being higher in the pecking order in that running back room. But when you look at all of them, and I just heard some amazing things about Walton today and how he's been doing, it's just, wow. You lose two kind of generational kind of running backs, and you still feel very good about the quality of the room, both the guy coaching them and the raw talent that's in the room.
Yeah, Notre Dame has had a pretty high level of success when it comes to recruiting and production, and even the coaches themselves. Like, I feel like they've had a pretty good run of running backs coaches, running back players, running back recruits, that it's become like cyclical and they just keep churning out good running backs, and it doesn't seem like that's going to stop anytime soon. And we alluded to them getting 2 running back commitments in the 2027 class, so that they're continuing to stockpile guys, and Juwan Sider has picked up things nicely as the running backs coach. Ed Straub says, it seems like the running back coach likes to use just 2 running backs. Assuming Williams is one, who do you think the other would be?
I think he would use 2 if he only felt like 2 could help him win games. I have a feeling it's going to be 3 this year. But if I had to pick the top 2, I would probably go with Williams and James, just because I haven't seen Kedron, but I have a feeling Kedron is going to have a role. But then what happens with the freshman?
Right.
So I reserve the right to change my answer later in August. But for now, Williams and James are doing a lot of things right. They're setting the bar very high for everybody else.
Yeah, I would agree that I think it's too early to though it didn't stop us in the offseason of trying to speculate who would be that number 2, but based on what we've seen, it's not like Williams or Nolan James have done anything that would suggest that they're going to lose opportunities based on what they're doing. So I would put James in that number 2 spot right now. But yeah, when Kedron Young gets healthy, that becomes more of a question. And then how does Jonas Walton continue to push from that freshman class there? I was chiming in a lot for Javian Osborne this offseason, but he's dealing with a wrist injury that he's coming back from, so he's sort of out of the mix for now. But maybe that changes by the time the season comes around. I think there's a lot of movement that can still happen there, but I think the positive is that it's movement in a way that it's guys raising their level of play rather than guys sort of not meeting expectations and having to find someone else to replace them. I'll throw this one in here because it's about Coach Sider. Sider said he would, Jeff Stevens sends this. Sider said he would like to help recruit non-running back positions for the 2027 class. What position or geographical area would he be best suited for?
He's a Florida guy.
Yeah.
So he has ties to South Florida. He went to high school there, and he also played at Florida A&M at the end of his career. He's recruited Florida a lot. What else positions could he recruit? I would say probably offensive skill positions, just because he's so familiar with the offense. I think he could help with quarterbacks in South Florida, and Notre Dame is looking at a couple of quarterbacks in Florida. And there always seems to be really good ones down there. So, yeah, having been a college quarterback, he just has this easygoing personality. Like, again, I'm an older guy. I don't know how that plays. It seems to play well with 17 and 18-year-olds. But for a guy that has kids and grandkids. He'd be welcome at my house anytime, and he's a guy that I would trust with my son or grandson.
Yeah, I think it's easy to understand why he's had success as a recruiter. I would agree with what you said in terms of Florida quarterbacks. I think receivers as well. I mean, any position in Florida, I think he can be an asset with knowing people down there and getting good information about recruits from that area in South Florida. I think there's a lot of things that he is contributing to Notre Dame's coaching staff with, even if it's not just with the running back position.
Yeah, and it's funny that you suddenly have a whole bunch of Florida guys on the staff. Aaron Henry's from Florida. Isn't Charlie Partridge from Florida, like Jacksonville maybe? And
I'm not sure where.
And then Brian John Marie, I'm trying to remember if he's from Florida. I have to look. But they are loading up on Florida people, and that's a good thing because that's an area where Notre Dame is having some good success.
Yeah, Charlie Partridge is from Plantation, Florida, and Brian Jean Marie is from. Let's see if I can pull it up fast. Oh, come on, it's slowing. It's loading slow for me.
Well, do you want me to sing something while you're looking it up?
No, yeah, he's from Florida as well. Apopka, Florida. Wow, I really butchered that, but let's
Not
talk
as
about
bad as my singing would have been.
So I saved us in one aspect. Let's talk about receivers. We'll talk about linebackers with Jean Marie's position group as well. But first, what do you feel like you learned about the wide receivers room from Mike Brown when he met with reporters on Friday?
I thought he did a really good job of answering questions about people individually. I think he held his cards close to the vest on how this was all going to play out in a depth chart and so forth. So I learned, for example, how giddy he was about Jordan Faison not playing lacrosse this year, and probably could have used him against Virginia on the weekend. But yeah, he's very excited about, and he had interesting stuff to say about people up and down our imaginary depth chart.
Right.
But I think what's going to be really interesting is how deep can you make a meaningful playing rotation. But the good thing is you're not defaulting to who number 5 and 6 is or 7 if you go that deep. You are having some real competition for those spots.
Yeah, and he talked about, listen, I make the depth chart on day one, but from there on, the players are the ones making the depth chart in terms of their performance and how they're handling things. And that certainly speaks to the competitive nature he wants these guys to play with in terms of vying for spots. They're trying to beat each other out. Obviously, they're trying to work together to improve. But I think the room is getting in a position where they can finally feel like that's a real thing. Like the second field receiver can really push, or the second slot receiver can really push, the second boundary receiver can really push. They're in a position now where those pieces can maybe be a little bit more interchangeable. Yes, there will eventually be a pecking order, but there is going to be room for guys to continue to develop and get in a position where they can impact games on Saturdays. And certainly right now, they're all trying to make whatever impact they can, and it'll get even more crowded when Jaden Greathouse is cleared, when Quincy Porter gets back from an injury. There's a lot of things, a lot of pieces in that room that are intriguing. That's going to be a fascinating storyline to track this offseason for sure. What do you think? Speaking of grading, Jaden Greathouse, how do you feel like he fits into the picture of everything with the wide receiver room?
Yeah, I really think that the top of the rotation is going to be 4 guys, and there's certainly other guys that could force that into a more equitable reps kind of situation. But I think you're going to see several of the top players be able to play other positions. I think Quincy Porter is into the boundary. I think that's where he's going to stay. And I think Jaden Greathouse will primarily be a slot. I think Jordan Faison can play inside and outside. I think Milan Graham will play inside and outside. And I think you're going to see all four of them on the field at times together. There's going to be times where Notre Dame feels like we can really take advantage of having 10 personnel on the field, and we're going to do it and just try to line up with us, especially if you like to play a lot of man. You're going to be calling for your mommy. And I think that's how it plays out. I think Jaden Greathouse is a big part of this because I think he can be so effective in the red zone, and he complements the skill sets of the other receivers so well. How do you assess Jaden Greathouse's role?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one thing that stands out to me about Jaden Greathouse is that he's probably as good of a contested catcher in terms of contested targets on Notre Dame's roster. I think he can go up and get the ball with guys in tight coverage, and with CJ Carr being a confident and aggressive quarterback, CJ Carr is not going to be afraid to throw it up and trust Jaden Greathouse to make plays. Now, obviously, Jaden Greathouse has to get back to being himself, which I'm sure has been frustrating from his perspective in terms of seemingly consistently dealing with hamstring issues. But there's some ability there that can be used in different positions along the receiver room. I think there's a lot of flexibility within the room in terms of what those guys are. They have a lot of guys that can play both field and slot, and I think that we're going to see a lot of mixing and matching with that, maybe to be a little bit less predictable and throw different looks at defenses. And I think you've talked a lot about in this offseason the potential to play 4 wide receivers at once. That isn't something we've seen Notre Dame do a ton, but I think when you have guys that are natural fits in the slot and you can play a slot receiver on each side of the field, that can be difficult for defenses to defend. So I'm curious to see what they do to sort of maximize that. And I think Jaden Greathouse plays a big role in that if he can get back to what we expect he can be. I spent some time talking to Jerome Bettis Jr. He was sort of one of the guys that everyone was looking at in the first spring practice because his physical transformation was obvious. I wanted to get to know what went into that. And he said he was pretty honest and straightforward about that. He's like, listen, I didn't make the travel roster the first game of the season last year, and I was watching the Miami game at home, and at that moment I knew that I hadn't done enough and I needed to do more to get myself in position to be competitive to try to earn some playing time or get in the rotation. And so he spent a lot of time working on his body, taking things seriously with Lauren Lando in the weight room. He would work out on Sundays with Adon Schuler. He said they were the only two in there. Even if Coach Lando told us we weren't supposed to be doing extra reps, I found a way to make some time to do that because I really wanted to make some improvements. And so we'll see what that turns into for him. I don't know that necessarily he is going to crack into the rotation this coming season, but it's starting to build a vision of what he can become. And I think Mike Brown described him as being a pleasant surprise this spring as someone who's attacking the football, and they want him to use that big body. Jerome Bettis Jr. said something to the effect that it's like, man, blocking guys is way easier now. Like I used to have to work really hard at that. Not that he's not working hard, but it's just like he's that much stronger and can get into guys, and it's not as big of a task as it once felt like for him. And so those are positives for him. And I think people are naturally interested in what becomes of his career because of who his father was. And I think he's a great interview. I really enjoyed talking to him. I basically had a one-on-one with him the way it worked out. So it was a good opportunity to catch up with him in his redshirt freshman year. Are there any other wide receiver takeaways you had, Eric?
Not really. I spent most of my time with the running backs. I did look through the transcripts and so forth and watch some of the videos, and I'm really curious how the freshmen are going to look at the end of the spring. There's so much competition there. I think they get a little bit lost. The one guy that has impressed me as a freshman in just the little bit that we've seen, Bubba Frazier is probably at the top of my list of the 5 freshman receivers. But I would expect that Kadon Finley and Devin Fitzgerald will catch my eye more as we get into, more meaningful reps later in the spring.
Yeah, and I think like Bubba Frazier's a natural fit in the slot, and that's where he has been playing this spring. Caden Finley, I think, is someone that could play a few different positions. They have been playing him in the slot, so I think there's maybe more of a natural. I think he has maybe some more learning to do in that. In that he's not a shifty slot receiver like Bubba Frazier is. He is essentially a thicker, big body receiver that almost looks like a tight end in some ways, which is fitting given that his father was a tight end. So I think I'm interested to see how they find ways to use him as his career and body develops. But with so many guys that are available for Notre Dame this year, you don't necessarily need them, and that's a position that Notre Dame hasn't been in at the wide receiver position in quite some time. All right, I promised we'd get into some linebacker talk after looking up where Brian Jean-Marie was from. What did we learn from linebackers coach Brian Jean-Marie when he met with reporters last Wednesday, I believe?
Well, I'll tell you, the most compelling things that came out of his mouth had to do with Lou Holtz. That was a really neat story. I don't know that I could tell it and do it justice on here, but Brian
Tyler Horko wrote it on the website if people want to go look for it.
Yeah. What I'll crystallize it into is Brian's he was like a strength GA at Louisville, and his first actual football coaching GA job South Carolina, and Charlie Strong was there with him. Charlie was at Notre Dame 100 years ago when I had black hair. But the way that when he first met Lou Holtz, it was just a really interesting story, but it came down to who you are. What he learned from Holtz is who you are is who are the people in your life who elevated who you are as a person. And I think that was a really, really great story. Brian tells it very well. Tyler Horka wrote it very well. So yeah, check it out on our website. As far as the linebacker stuff, I think that he's doing a great job of learning Chris Ash's system, that he's doing a good job with some of his better linebackers not being involved fully, with Drake Bowen and Kingston Viliamu-Asa being pretty much spectators. And then we did see Madden Framo running around with his surgically repaired wrist with a red jersey on. So some of the and I know Tyler has zeroed in on Kia, so we'll let him talk about him. But I just think he's doing a good job with what he has. He feels very optimistic about where it's going with that position group. I would too, with that talent, and with Kingston Viliamu-Asa being on schedule for a return in 2026. I think that's pretty exciting. Tyler, what did you take away from it? Because I did not see his transcript, but I was there for part of his interview.
Yeah, I'll start with Kia, since you mentioned that, and that was someone who flashed a little bit in the first practice when we got to watch practice. I think Chris Ash spoke a little about him, and Chris Ash was honest when he said, you know what, a year ago I wouldn't have known much about him, but I've learned quite a bit about him this offseason in terms of where he's at and his potential for us moving forward. Brian Jean-Marie said he's seen a lot of growth in Kia. He likes the athleticism that he has. It sort of pops off the screen. I think those are some of the things that we noticed, that we hadn't really had a lot of chances to see him in action so far in his Notre Dame career, because there's so many talented linebackers on the roster. But with injured guys this spring, he's getting more opportunities to pitch in there. And so I think that's a name, maybe it's not the same, but similar to Jerome Bettis Jr., where it's like, okay, we're seeing positive progress for this guy, and this isn't probably going to impact this coming season, but it's a sign of what is in the room moving forward after next season. And you don't need as many linebackers as Notre Dame has had in terms of depth, because you don't play that many, but the depth will likely dwindle a bit going into next season. And so it's nice to have guys that you feel like can potentially step up when it's their turn. Obviously, Madden Framo is a guy that would be expected to do so next season or the following season as well. When you got a number of guys like Jalen Sneed and Drake Bowen that probably aren't going to be back here anymore. I did talk to Jalen Sneed myself. I wanted to talk to him about why he returned, and he just felt like this was where he needed to be. He felt like Notre Dame has a legit chance to win a national championship, and he's confident in what Notre Dame has on offense and defense, and that was one of the reasons he came to Notre Dame was to try to win a national championship. So it would be, I don't know if he used the word foolish, but he was pretty strong in that. He was like, it would be silly for me to leave. Like, why would I leave? So I thought that was interesting that he saw that from that perspective. Speaks to I think the culture of the program that a guy like that's going into his 5th year and isn't guaranteed a starting role necessarily. He's probably playing in a rotation of some sort, but he's coming back for his final year of college eligibility and going to give what he has to Notre Dame in their effort to try to win a national championship. And I asked him what would be successful for you, and obviously the national championship is part of that. But he's like, beyond that, like I want to get to the NFL, I want to win a national championship, but I want to know that I've positively impacted my teammates. And I think that was a cool thing to hear from Jalen Sneed, someone who came to Notre Dame as a highly sought recruit, maybe hasn't been a guy that looks like a first-round draft pick or a second-round draft pick throughout his career, has only shown flashes and has struggled with some consistency, but he's certainly bought into what Notre Dame is doing and the impact he can make, even if he's not a star player all the time on Notre Dame's defense. So I that was just I maybe had personal interest in that story just from just seeing his career play out and where he's at with that, and him being still motivated but also at peace with what he is and where he's at and what he can continue to do at Notre Dame. What did you learn about what Drake Bowen and Kingston Viliamu are doing, even though they're not practicing with Notre Dame? How are they impacting Notre Dame?
Well, you see them out on the field. They were out on the field enough that our photographer got a lot of good pictures of both of them. So I'll let you answer that one because you're more plugged into that one. That was part of the Brian Jean-Marie that I missed.
All right. Yeah. Jean-Marie was very positive about the way that those guys continue to influence their teammates. I heard from a couple of the linebackers themselves talking about how much they're helping. Even Jalen Sneed was like, yeah, I'm trying to lead, but I know that Drake Bowen is there to help us out too. It's not that it's totally on me to do that. So I think Notre Dame is getting plenty out of those guys, even though that they have their own things to do. Like Brian Jean-Marie says, listen, those guys have to get better on their own. Like they have to still continue to progress as players, even though they're injured, and they're not able to do that on the field. But there are ways that they can do that, and in terms of helping out, he described them as like assistant coaches right now in the way that they're assisting the linebackers and him, and I think probably helping a little bit with the transition for Brian Jean-Marie. He's coaching a whole new group of players, and to have guys that are sidelines, unfortunate, but there's an advantage to that he has guys helping him out and willing to sort of help make that transition a little bit more smoothly for Notre Dame.
Right. And there's, it's a lot of people either limited or, Kahanu Kia, Ko's brother, is not full go this spring. And Jacoby Clapper is also sidelined. They're going to have a big contingent to deal with in the summer and in August, but right now it's a smaller contingent. So really valuable reps for the guys that are healthy.
Yep. All right. Before we get into recruiting, I wanted to pick your brain on 5 freshmen who've impressed you the most so far this spring. So what list did you come up with in terms of the most impressive freshmen to date?
Yeah. So my thought is that we had Mike Golick Jr. on the podcast on Friday, and he mentioned how he watches spring practice, and I liked it. He said, you're stacking days, and we see a practice here, not a practice for a while, a practice here, not a practice for a while. So I use that as a little bit of a disclaimer, but these are not in the order. But here's the guys that have caught my eye and then I want to see more of. And that's Noah Grubbs, Bubba Frazier, Jonas Walton, Rodney Durham, and Joey O'Brien. There's some others. I think with the offensive lineman, I'm sure like McHugh is a guy that's really worth looking at. I don't think he's going to be in the two deeps this year, or I would spend more time in practice watching him.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others. I could see other people kind of bubble up to the top. Like Nick Reddish, the first day was a guy that had a pick six. And so I kind of want to see more of him. Was that just an isolated, bad pass by was it Noah that threw that? Noah Grubbs?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And or was it, Nick Reddish is a guy that might be able to help with the depth at nickel already this year. So, but those are my five. How about you? Who'd you come up with?
I think I had four, the same ones. I had Grubbs, Frazier, Dunham, O'Brien, and then I did include Nick Reddish as my fifth. I think,
okay.
I just like the ability for him to come in and play nickel right away as a freshman. I think that's just a hard thing to do. And so not only just go out there and handle it, but make a play and take advantage of an opportunity, I think is commendable. So I feel like it's not that there's not plenty of other exciting freshmen out there on the field, right? Like there's all kinds of talent out there, but I think he earned that praise. And so I wanted to make sure to include him on the list because of that. Those other guys, like I think we probably had, especially like Rodney Dunham and Joey O'Brien, 5-star recruits. Like there was high expectations for them. I think Reddish was a consensus 3-star recruit. So he goes out there and makes some plays and earns some good publicity for himself. I guess as a whole, when we talk about this freshman class, do you feel like it looks differently than previous ones? Can you tell that this was the number 2 class in the country?
And a lot of my intel pieces about that tomorrow, I talked to somebody that's very plugged in about it, and they said there's going to be surprises from that freshman class when we get to the season. Now, again, is that going to show up in the blue gold game, or is that going to show up in September? More likely in September because it's a progression. But the coaching staff is thrilled with how these freshmen have been practicing and how they're progressing. From my eye, what I'm seeing is the reality of where college football is now for a power like Notre Dame. You now have gone from 85 scholarship players to 100 on this team. So that's going to push some really talented freshmen down. You also had your best year in the transfer portal. So instead of maybe Kadon Finley and Devin Fitzgerald getting earlier opportunities, you have Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham plugging some areas that, 5 years ago you wouldn't be doing. And then you think about the retention that Marcus Freeman has been able to do with his key people on the roster, and that also squishes them down. Having said that, you still look at them and you say, athletically, like somebody like Bubba Frazier, wow, that kid can move. You don't see a lot of freshman receivers come in and scoot down the field and go through those drills like he does. And it's really across the board. Dunham and Iwatade are both, I would say, undersized, not by Logan Thomas dimensions, but everybody else at this point. And yet you could see what they're going to turn into. And I'm not picking on Hulack and Reef, but you don't see the pathway to playing time as clearly as you do for those two. And right. So I do think that this freshman class really stands out at just about every position.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to like take the whole class in because there is that.
So many.
It's not just it's not a concentration of talent just at one position, right? There's clusters of talent in the secondary, on the offensive line, at receiver. There's a lot of different at defensive end, a lot of different position groups that they really did a great job of recruiting in this last cycle, and I think that's showing up here in these spring practices, and will show up more and more into the summer, into the season, and then well beyond that as well. All right, I was going to have you tee me up for recruiting talk, but Irish Fan 1010 is doing a good job of it with this. Good evening, gentlemen. I know he sent this earlier.
Well, I'm going to take a sip of coffee then, since he's doing that.
He said, "What's your opinion on the 2 recent running back commits?" So I'll give you guys a snapshot of those guys. So if you don't know, within the last week, Lathan Wissington out of Waco, Texas, and Isaiah Rogers out of Springfield, Massachusetts, committed to Notre Dame. Both running backs. Wissington's 5'11", 195 pounds. Rivals ranks him as the number 12 running back in the class, number 171 overall. He rushed for 1,502 yards and 24 touchdowns in his junior season last fall. If you watch his film, he's very much a one cut and go guy. Like he finds the lane and he hits it, and he has great speed, takes off, splits the defense, and finds the end zone a lot. And so he's a fun guy to watch. Isaiah Rogers, 5'10", 190. So they're pretty similar physically, out of Springfield Central High School in Massachusetts. Rivals ranks Rogers as the number 20 running back and number 275 overall in the 2027 class. He rushed for 1,217 yards and 18 touchdowns in 10 games. He also caught 17 passes for 287 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's more of a guy that has shown an ability to be a 3-down back. I think Wissington probably has that in him. He just doesn't get as many opportunities to be a receiver in the same way that Rogers has. But he has big playability too. He has good speed. I think Wissington is probably faster than him, at least on the field. I think they have similar track times, but Wissington looks faster to me. But Rogers is, I think, a little bit more shifty. Like he will bounce around side to side to find the hole. Instead of making the sort of one cut and go, he can sort of wiggle through the offensive line between the tackles and find lanes that maybe don't develop right away. So he's not afraid to go in between the tackles. I think he can play physically in there, and he's also fast enough to run away from guys once he finds a lane too. So a lot to like there. I think if you asked me a month ago who are the 2 most likely running backs to commit to Notre Dame, I don't know that I would have said either of them necessarily. I think it was pretty wide open in terms of where things were heading for Notre Dame with the running backs, with a lot of guys interested, but not a lot of progress. But these guys got on campus for junior day and were ready to claim spots in the class, and Notre Dame was ready to take them. So Jaywan Sider has his duo for the 2027 class. Had a great class in 2026 with Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton, and back that up with another good class here with Wissington and Rogers. So hopefully that gets everyone updated on the running backs.
Do you want some more recruiting questions?
Yeah, hit me up with some more recruiting questions.
Okay, the Irish followed up their epic junior day. I added epic into that earlier this month with another impressive list of visitors this past weekend. Who are the most important names to know coming out of last weekend?
Yeah, and I'll focus just on the 2027 class. There are names to know in the 2028 class as well, but for the sake of not keeping everyone here for another hour, the names to know, I think, from the 2027 class starts with Cade Cooper, wide receiver out of Pennsylvania that Notre Dame is trending really well with. I think the Irish are a clear top contender there, and they really like him. He got on campus in January, even though Notre Dame wasn't really hosting recruits in January. He stopped by on his way, making some other visits in the Midwest, and they liked him, offered him, and things are trending in the right direction for Notre Dame there. Obviously, quarterback remains unsolved in the 2027 class after Teddy Gerard reclassified. Camden Lapati got on campus this past weekend. He's committed to Illinois. He's considering Notre Dame, also considering Michigan as well. He's get out of Utah, so has connections to some of the coaching staff at Michigan, with that staff coming from Utah. But I think Notre Dame's right in the thick of it there. I think if he wants to commit to Notre Dame would gladly have him, and we'll see if he wants to sort of do that this spring or wants to continue to see out his Illinois commitment, test out some other places. I think it's a sort of wait and see approach right there. Right now, Notre Dame's planning to get Champ Mons on campus later in April. And so that will be a big visit as well if Lapati still hasn't made a flip decision yet. Tight end Malik Howard is added to the list of tight end prospects that Notre Dame is in good position with. Notre Dame's fighting Alabama and Tennessee there, a 4-star recruit that has a lot of talent. Montana Toilolo is said to Mike Singer that Notre Dame is at the top right now, and that is good news for Notre Dame, a defensive tackle out of Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana, California, school that is a national power that Notre Dame has had struggles recruiting at because they are a little bit of a USC factory, but a talented defensive tackle prospect there is showing some interest in the Irish. Safety Gavin Williams is another guy that Notre Dame is a top contender for. He's out of California. Things continue to be trending in the right direction for Notre Dame there. And then lastly, I know it seems like I'm rambling here, but there's a lot of important recruits.
It does seem like that.
A lot of important recruits on campus. Luis Esposito, he is a Michigan commit. Notre Dame offered him. He's an offensive lineman. We'll see how things progress moving forward there.
I'm just teasing you. The last question was about how many commitments are going to come out of that. I don't know what the timeline is here, so I'm gonna put a timeline on it. How many commitments out of these couple weekends do you think will be in the bag by the end of spring football, and then maybe by the end of June?
By the end of spring football, I would say, so Notre Dame already has 2. I won't include those 2 guys in this number. So in terms of how many more, I wouldn't be surprised if it's maybe 2 or 3 by the end of spring. Okay. I think it certainly could be more. The timing is hard to predict, like if a kid's going to feel ready to do it by the end of the spring or if he's going to want to go into official visits. I think when you take a step back and look at where things will end up eventually, I think maybe 7 or 8 more out of these last couple weekends. I think that's how good Notre Dame has done with these guys who have visited and sort of the role that Notre Dame recruiting is on right now. When Notre Dame gets guys on campus, they tend to do well with them right now. And it seemed like there's a little bit of a lull in recruiting for Notre Dame because they didn't host guys in January. And that was sort of a natural ebb and flow of the recruiting cycle for Notre Dame, but they're back, in a positive direction. Like I mentioned, they have their running back position wrapped up now. They'll continue to focus on some other areas of need and put this class together. I don't know if it's going to be able to match the heights of the last class, but I think it's going to be a class that's going to be highly ranked. And I think good numbers wise too. I think they're probably, seems like I would be surprised if they don't get up to about 25 in this class. It seems like they're going to continue to be aggressive in high school recruiting and not hold back on bringing in high schoolers and then figuring things out from there.
Okay, bonus question. Just give us the reset. Where does Notre Dame stand with total commitments? Where do they stand in the national team recruiting rankings?
Yeah, Notre Dame has 9 commitments. I don't know where they stand in the rankings, but I will pull that up and find it in a second here. I did not check how it changed today.
Get that gerbil to run through the wheel faster.
With the commitment. Notre Dame's class is ranked 7th right now, with its 9 commitments. And if you look at the rivals rankings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of them are 4-star recruits. Richie Flanagan and Amari Irvin are 3-star recruits according to rivals, and so is Sean Kraft, the long snapper. But he's the number 1 long snapper, so you can't hold that against him. So Notre Dame's recruiting at a high level. And if you look at the rivals industry, I think all but Sean Kraft are 4-star recruits. Yes, that's correct. So they're recruiting blue chip recruits. That's what you want, 4 or 5-star recruits in your class. Notre Dame's going to work on trying to add some more talent to it, but they're getting things rolling here this spring.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us this week on Football Never Sleeps. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Like I mentioned earlier, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please make sure you do. If you haven't subscribed to blueandgold.com, take advantage of our spring sale. Get 50% off the first year of an annual subscription. That is a great deal and will end in April, so make sure you take advantage of it before it expires. And we will be back next week, talk more spring football. I hope everyone has a great Easter and enjoys some time with family in the coming week. And we'll talk to you soon.